Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're pairing WorstFish, a chess engine that plays the worst possible move in a position, against Zach, a chess bot with an elo of 1. This was highly requested after the video where I tried to lose against Zach, and the game might not end how you'd expect. Let's dive in. Okay, the fish with the white pieces and Zach with the black pieces. Fishy starts off with pawn to g4, met by Zach's pawn to e5, followed up by the spectacular pawn to f4, inviting mate in one single move. And we start to see that each bot contributed 1 brain cell to this game, which somehow canceled each other out to equal 0 brain cell chess. Now, of course, Zach doesn't accept the mate in 1 and instead plays pawn to g5, ensuring that this is no longer possible ever again, and bringing the eval bar back to almost 0-0. The fish is only on move 3, but is already kind of desperate and moves up with king to f2, and Zach meets it with pawn to c5, which does not stop the fish from marching the king directly into the center of the board. Now, normally this would be a problem of some kind because, there are like 10 million different moves here that would be horrible for white and would lead to checkmate, but Zach is not looking for checkmate as far as we can tell, and instead plays pawn to b6. He's only shuffled pawns around with seemingly no purpose. Now, the fish actually makes the first capture of the game by capturing on g5, which again probably is the worst move in the position because there's queen takes g5 to counter, and that leads to a whole sea of trouble for the white pieces. Or you can just hang your knight, like Zach does with knight to f6, again bringing the eval bar almost back to 0-0. Because WorstFish got to play with the white pieces, it seems to be a game of black is completely winning and then Zach finding a way to equalize. No worries though, Fish is still giving away lots of free pieces with pawn to g6, and Zach is still ignoring them and trying to give away free pieces of his own with knight to h5. The fish has not managed to lose the king, so it instead brings out the queen. With queen to e1, it will now try to lose this piece next, but no worries, Zach will stop it handily with knight to g3, cutting off the queen's range of motion and hanging the knight in one move, which frankly offends the fish, who ignores it for the next move of pawn to h3, but Zach is still hopeful that at least the queen might capture and plays pawn to c4. The queen will do no such thing and plays queen to f2 instead, and Zach continues with pawn to d6, still having basically only moved pawns minus this random thrown into the middle of the board knight. For the next couple of moves, they basically just try to avoid each other. You can see that no captures are being made until Zach decides that he's going to try once again to give away some more free material with bishop takes h3, which the fish handily avoids with pawn to c3. And that eval bar flies right back down to mate in 1 for black, actually. Of course, this checkmate in 1 is queen takes g5, which has been sitting on the board since basically the beginning of the game and will never get accepted. Instead, Zach actually actively untangles white's position and gives the king some nice breathing room on the adjacent diagonal squares, which WorstFish capitalizes on to try and cover up all of those squares, again reinvigorating queen takes g5. WorstFish is actively trying to lose the game, but it's not completely confirmed if Zach is actively trying to lose the game as well. Are these basically equivalent bots that both just want to lose? Or is WorstFish, the slightest bit better at actively losing? As you can see, it actively has placed its king in the center and put mate in 1 on the board. Whereas Zach has not done quite the same. In fact, Zach has taken some material, but has still played somehow equally terrible moves. They once again spend the next couple of moves basically just trying to avoid each other and not make any, substantial captures or changes to the position. If anything, they're just trying to hang as much material as feasibly possible, and any sort of material hang is always met by the opponent with an even more absurd hanging of material, which is almost always promptly ignored. We see WorstFish undeveloping some pieces, and Zach actually takes some free material for the first time in the entire game on move 21 with e takes f3. WorstFish capitalizes immediately and centralizes the king on that newly opened square, and Zach continues to advance his pawn. After the devastating d5 fork, Zach also remembers that he knows how to castle, and throws the king to the queen side of the board, before promptly hanging another knight. Now, surprisingly enough, WorstFish does actually take this, and the reason that it takes is because it's still mate in 1 on the board. I'll give you guys a moment to find what that mate is. In this very specific position, the mate in 1 is pawn to f5 checkmates the king, which previously would not have been checkmate since the king could have also captured the knight. Again, WorstFish thinks that its opponent is actually trying to win, Zach, I don't know where his head is. I'm going to assume in the clouds, but he's not actually trying to win anything. So when WorstFish takes on f4 and sets up mate in 1, Zach promptly ignores it and hangs a knight instead. You can kind of see this repeating pattern. They both, try and hang as much material as feasibly possible and try not to take the opponent's material whenever they can. So they continue to repeat this pattern move after move after move until finally Zach takes some more material with bishop takes f3. And here again, WorstFish does actually take back because apparently this sets up like a mate in 12. It says mate in 10 on the eval bar, but I think it's mate in 12 in this position, just based on the analysis offside. But Zach has already decided that mate in 1 is no fun, and mate in 10, I suppose, even less so. So he takes on a3, bringing the eval actually to +1 in white's favor. The fish tries to hang the rook, allowing this promotion, but Zach ignores it and just promotes on f1 anyways, which of course the fish completely ignores. You can see the eval bar is just doing topsy-turvy tricks. Again, they're both just trying to completely avoid each other as much as possible. I'm assuming there's some calculation that happens where, for instance, by promoting to a queen, even though you gain material, you would lose more material if the opponent were to take. But of course, neither opponent has any way of realizing that the other has no intention of winning. So every time that WorstFish hangs mate in 1, Zach is never going to see it, but WorstFish isn't going to learn from that. He's just going to keep trying to, set up a mate in 1, which ironically leads to them gaining material in their attempt to sort of lose the game. Not to mention, we are now on move 40 of a 300 move game. So there's still quite a ways to go. They basically spend this middle portion of the game trying to get their own kings checkmated. As you can see, they're both centered in the middle of the board. Zach isn't actively trying to get his king checkmated, but anytime that WorstFish tries to actually set up a checkmate, Zach untangles it and, tries to lose material instead. Now, interestingly enough, as we kind of zoom through these moves, you can see that they're both avoiding capturing any pieces, but every so often, both of them have to take something. Otherwise, the game would end by 50 move rule, which states that if no pawn has been moved and no capture has been made in the last 50 moves, the game is automatically declared a draw. This is just a normal rule of chess, which you usually don't see unless you're in an endgame, or unless you have two 1 elo bot engines playing against each other, trying to not capture each other's pieces because they would both like to lose. The eval bar is going to need a spa day after this, but as you can see, again, they continue to avoid capturing absolutely anything, but every so often they have to capture something. Now, this specific capture was not because of the 50 move rule, it's because it hands black mate in 2 on a platter, which black handily avoids by taking with the king instead. The mate in 2, of course, would have been queen takes, the bishop has to block, queen takes back, does end the game. But how boring would that be? Let's take with the king instead and make it mate in 3 for white. I'll admit, the most fascinating part of this game is the ability of these engines to set up a position such that because they both don't want to lose necessarily, WorstFish actually wants to lose, but Zach is just playing terrible moves. They end up in this position where the eval bar flips from mate in 2 for one side to mate in 2 for the other, and back and forth, which is quite amusing. I'll show the actual eval analysis graph at the end of the game so you guys can see what an absolute headache this was for both sides, but they continue to sort of dance around each other for several more moves. And again, because Zach is technically not programmed to try and lose in the way that WorstFish is, he is at least a little bit random, even though he does make really terrible moves and tries not to win. He doesn't necessarily try to lose in the same way that WorstFish does, so he sometimes does take free stuff. But of course, he promptly tries to give it right back away, which WorstFish actively avoids by blocking his own pieces. Now, since they both have advanced so many pawns and gridlocked some of the others, they can either promote, which would gain the material, which is not a good thing unless the opponent can take, or they can just dance around with their pieces and achieve basically nothing until Zach comes up with a brilliant idea of just under promoting to a bishop. Now, this is pretty comical because we're only on move 77, but he does still have the exact same blurbs, and I think the specific blurb for this one is, oh no, an under promotion, I didn't mean to do that. But as the game continues and he continues to play absolutely terrible moves, for instance, here there's a free queen and he just actively avoids it, it starts to sound almost ironic. It starts to sound like Zach is on move 280 what have you of trying to give you a way to win and ironically saying, oh no, my what have you. It's really quite comical, but it starts to sound very sardonic towards the end of the game. Anyways, they continue to dance around each other, no captures being made, except, Zach's every so often random capture, because Zach actually does sometimes remember that he can take pieces, but then they go right back to hanging each other's pieces, free bishop, free queen. and, ignoring each other's free pieces as well. Now, to be completely honest, we're on move 88, now 89, now 90. We've witnessed another horrendous under promotion by Zach, but we can clearly see that black has a very large material advantage over WorstFish. The problem is, and herein lies the crux of the situation, WorstFish thinks that Zach is trying to make the best possible moves. That is, WorstFish's worst move is dependent on thinking that Zach is going to make the best move. For instance, if WorstFish hangs a queen, it's going to assume that Zach's best move is to take back, which is what it thinks Zach will play. Thus, queen to h6 is in fact the worst move. But the problem is Zach is never going to capitalize on any of these opportunities. So WorstFish's actual worst move would be setting up a forced checkmate like we did when we played against Zach by compromising its own king's position and then forcing Zach to take in such a way that it gives checkmate. Right? Two subjectively different definitions of worst based on what the opponent is actually going to play. Of course, it's not like WorstFish is learning anything. WorstFish thinks that it's playing against an opponent that's going to try, as does Zach, and neither of them is ever going to figure out that the other does not want to win the game. So they continue to sort of just dance around. Zach does have an enormous material advantage, but frankly, WorstFish is not learning that Zach doesn't want to checkmate. So even though this position is mate in one for black, probably in several different ways, it's never going to happen. And Zach is going to continue to dance around with his 1,000,001 pieces around white's king as long as he can ensure that white always has an escape. With that, we cross 115 moves of absolute buffoonery. We're just dancing around. WorstFish finally is forced basically to take Zach's knight. But this isn't a perfectly good example of a completely RNG move. This was by total random chance that this move had to happen. As you can see, if it's possible to avoid it and play a king move instead, the fish will elect to make the king move. And if it's possible to take a free queen, Zach will not take a free queen instead. Both sides go right back to just giving away a whole bunch of free material, and really nothing else happens for a decent couple of moves until this promotion. Again, the only reason that WorstFish played this move is not because WorstFish wants to gain material to force Zach to checkmate it. The only reason that WorstFish played this is because it puts mate in one on the board. Again, not realizing that when given the option to mate in one, Zach would rather have fun, and we get queen to e4. I'll show you guys the eval and the analysis at the end because it is really quite comical. And of course, the fish meets this with a free queen. Now, they go back to their shenanigans because they've both completely run out of new ideas. There are no promotions and no captures for many moves hereafter. I will quickly zoom through so you guys get an idea of what exactly happened, but they're basically just dancing around each other, achieving absolutely nothing. You can see the kings are running up and down the board. The pieces are sliding all around, but absolutely nothing of any meaning. Not a capture, not a check, nothing here of any interest is happening. They're both completely avoiding each other to the best of their ability until finally, with queen takes h1, WorstFish does capture a rook. Again, it took all of those moves and basically complete RNG for a position like this to arise, where by capturing this, it invigorates a mate in two on the board, which Zach promptly ignores and hangs the rook instead. They go back to shuffling about for a couple of more moves before finally Zach decides to take back some material with queen takes f2. Again, total RNG. There's no meaning behind this move. It's just that Zach isn't trying to lose in the same way that WorstFish is. WorstFish is finding the objectively worst move in the position and playing it, and Zach is just trying to avoid winning. So that's why we have this imbalance where Zach is slightly ahead on material. I say slightly even though it's an entire queen because frankly, unless he had 5 or 10 extra pieces, it's not going to make a huge difference for two bots that are basically just running around avoiding each other, which they continue to do for a very decent while. And this is finally where that concept of the 50 move rule starts to kick in, because you do see some sort of Hail Mary ideas like king takes d6. Again, this is just setting up checkmate in one for black, but these moves will become more and more rare and more necessary as we start to run out of moves. Otherwise, again, 50 move rule will end the game dramatically in a draw. Zach is sitting pretty with his enormous piece advantage, and they continue to just sort of shuffle around each other, and finally, on move 227, we do get a capture by Zach, who, again, every so often, some 70 moves or so, he remembers that he can take free stuff. And so he does, which WorstFish immediately recaptures, because it's a very easy simplification for black in this position. So Zach naturally undevelops one of his pieces. WorstFish tries to give away the queen, and Zach ignores it. WorstFish tries to move the king out of the way, leaving the queen hanging two different ways, just to get promptly ignored by a passed pawn. And so the dance continues of these random pushes. Both sides only have one more pawn to do absolutely anything with, so white takes advantage and promotes to a rook, which does set up a mate in 3 for black, which, surprising to nobody, is promptly ignored with bishop to d4. However, you can see that the eval bar isn't really skewing in white's favor so much anymore, so white's accuracy in finding the absolute worst moves has finally compiled to a situation where Zach does have a very noticeable amount of material advantage. And unless he finds a way to compromise WorstFish's position in such a way that mate is forced, the fish is probably not going to take any of it. And we see this sort of pattern continue, blah, blah, blah. Nobody does absolutely anything. They're both dancing around each other like pretty ballerinas. And finally, Zach does take the rook, which leaves WorstFish with one singular queen. And I'll admit, this part of the game was probably the most frustrating for me personally, because you really want to see WorstFish, give away the queen in such a way that Zach has to recapture and somehow it equals checkmate. But WorstFish, again, is assuming that Zach is looking for the best moves, and so its worst move is always going to be one that sets up Zach for a best move that equals checkmate, which Zach will never play. And so, I suppose, à la rendance, the dance continues. Pardon my terrible French. WorstFish continues giving away free pieces, and black continues completely ignoring them, and they go on and on and on and on and on and on, and finally, much later, they are once again threatened by the 50 move rule, and black plays f1 equals queen, nullifying the 50 move rule concept, and once again restarting the timer, just in time for the fish to hang a queen. Okay, queen to g6, they're both just hanging a whole bunch of material, but as you can see, Zach does have a very significant material advantage, right? It's not like WorstFish has enough, such that the RNG of it forcing Zach to checkmate it is very high. I don't believe that's the case in this position, but you can tell that the fish is more effective at losing material than Zach is. So Zach isn't a perfect, worst move finder, but he's pretty darn close, if I have to be honest. They keep shuffling around pieces, absolutely nothing of interest for a long while, until we get to this move, right? They're shuffling, both, neither wants to give checkmate until we get to move 300. This is move 300 both on chess.com, which is where the Zach bot is hosted, and on Lichess, which is where the WorstFish bot is hosted. In this position, WorstFish plays the move queen to d2, and after Zach plays queen to f7, the game automatically ends in a draw. Now, the interesting thing is the game did not automatically end in a draw on chess.com, which is correct. I say correct because if you look at this handy little reference sheet on the right, you can see that the last promotion or capture was actually made on move 276, which was only 25 moves ago. So concretely, chess.com here, the Zach bot that is in the right for not having ended the games. The Zach bot didn't think anything had happened. It only offered me the possibility of resigning because it was ready to play fourth. Now, I really have no idea why the game ended on move 300. I'm going to assume it's some sort of limitation on Lichess's side, especially because they allow people to just invent bots and just run it on their website, which is an absolute beautiful thing that they've done for the community, but I can understand why they would have limitations set up. Anybody who knows why it ends on exactly move 300, if it's not for that reason, which is frankly just my assumption, you can let me know in the comments down below. But ultimately, WorstFish basically lost the game by forfeit, and Zach does, again, by forfeit, win this game. There is plenty of material to checkmate, and since WorstFish elected to leave the game, I will count this as a victory for Zach. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know down below what other freaky ideas I should do with the Zach bot. It is worth mentioning that Zach is technically Martin's nephew, and we have definitely put Martin through the ringer on this channel, so let me know if I should do something similar for Zach to, haze him into the chess community. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.